do it once a month, though not always on the same Friday, and it is hosted by City Lights Bookstore. Yay! Yay! And by the North Carolina Writers Network, the chapter. Yay! Yes, quite. And I think we will probably need to aim for maybe a 6-minute maximum tonight. We have 9 people going to read, so if you were going for the half-hour special,
half-hour special, talk to Gary Carden.
Yeah, Gary is not here tonight. So our first reader is Matt Nelson, a veteran of
make sure
readings.
Thank you.
And Mr. Nelson.
All right. Oh, this is going to be a good experience. For those of you who don't know, I take songs titles from artists I like and make kind of a poem out of it. It does sound kind of preachy, like religion, but I'm very moderate, and everything just happens to flow the way it does. And I was really happy to have this one, even though the circumstances for why I had reading this one tonight are a little iffy.
So you want us to guess, right?
No, I'll actually I'll state it at the very end. It's said because that's what it is.
Okay.
Yeah. I said, for some people in life, time stands still so they can't see all the problems of the world. Full of people running one marathon to the next with little time to rest, to stop and remember that they still have free will and take a little time to see how far they've come. I said, and anything they sadly may have missed during the long struggle of trying to avoid the raging high water of society. You see, no matter how good your vision is, there will always be an after image of a chance for broadening one's horizons into new territories, so that a better life isn't just some distant illusion meant to convince the masses that they're losing it, and to find something simple to pass time until the anthem of life runs out and sorrow prevents many from wanting to do better. So once the sea of tears finally dries up to reveal an island paradise of prosperity, so that no one can take away. So there is a secret mission in life for everyone to find a way to make their epic mark in the world, shifting the limelight away from those born into glory and onto the many workers with various scars from going through the motions of normal life and trying to stay above water long enough to create whatever legacy for future generations and learn how to swim stronger so that the dreaded alien shore isn't as far away, so that no one, thinks they can't make it closer towards the shallows. Providing a chance, to touch bottom long enough to have one little victory to inspire a mightier confidence to prove anyone can stick it out with a few moments to gather lost strength. No one knows how the way the wind blows them through life. But they're always to the point the way to take another step towards glory, and it greatly helps to take a friend to lean on for tough days. Serving both as sword and armor so that the next challenge won't seem to hit as hard. But it's a far cry to think that friends will always be together when things look dark and there isn't some light, reaching to provide a little relief and hopefully resist whatever lies in the shadows to lead those still treading water into an unfriendly current, and not many want to roll the bones to tempt fate to creating another limbo where the times to swim are insanely limited, because whenever one is between the wheels of life, able to move at a moment's notice despite being very heavy. And if a proper plan is not made long in advance, no one stands a ghost of a chance at escaping. Even someone can make it to shore and onto dry land. The shape of things new and strange are eager to meet the lucky few at all the crossroads, so that journey to fortune remains difficult. Diverting weary travelers into subdivisions to prevent any form of finish line for being so close, that powerless beings obtain the bravado of invincibility and lead others into the light of victory. The path of the seeker of glory isn't an easy one, and it can be wrought with countless hardships meant to keep the working man in their rut, to prevent the view from the other side being not as hard to see, while keeping hope a little while longer in the path to climb out looking easier to touch with the first step, turning the ceiling unlimited into a low edge just out of reach, so with the desire to stand up, I said, at the top, being so much closer, the sweet miracle of freedom that I said is at long last, said in front of you, said like a long lost friend, said who also made it out of the cradle, finally awake to gaze across the land to discover the earth sign that had always been there, awaiting fresh eyes. No matter where we are on this rock with life, the stars look down to provide a little relief with their gentle light to prevent the ever-present darkness from fully taking over the fragile land and struggling to keep the cold fire from finding other places to spread its great wickedness, even after half the world has already been torn asunder from the first spark, gaining undeserved life amongst once good people, so with their compassion being reduced to a thin vapor trail of woe. There wasn't a distant early warning, I said, of when disaster descended to work its dark magic to place an invisible lock and key, said, on anyone wanting to see the sun shine again. I said, burdened with the heavy shackles, I said, striking like chain lightning, so that escape would be all but a faint memory, while too many normal people work hand over fist to try to keep their dreams, I said, dream alive longer. Yet those sitting at the top are like Tom Sawyer, wanting everyone else to do the work while stealing all the rewards of seeing their grand designs come into existence without giving proper credit, until a twist of fate befalls the leaders, creating a farewell to kings and queens unfit for any crown. Look, I'm no one's hero, yet I'm glad there are people in front of me who want to listen and making memories when the fire of life gained new fuel to melt away the gloom while being ready to turn the page on their own life to see what wasn't so far away with a little effort to keep joy closer to the heart where it can be protected and no one can dare steal the powers of the mystic rhythms lurking just below the surface, waiting for the right time to regain glory. I said, and declare that positive emotion is here again, and evil has no place in such a beautiful world when so many don't know the color of right. Can be anything if we remember to smile and always keep our hearts and minds open to the idea that anything is possible, so that everyday glory stands tall. Like those around me, I know that finding my way can never be reached without great effort mixed with the many lessons of those who finally believed in me, stemming from the support of wanting the same souls before and after our encounter to serve as a miracle in great times. Whether you fly by night, walk in the morning, or run during the day, there's a great place for everyone to realize that they can be a new world man or woman when so many things have grown old to prove in the end we have a journey to make during our time on this earth, and the speed of love can be used to set the pace in how long it takes for us to reach the finish line. It said, and still with a heart full of soul to guide us, it said, and in other cases, it said, in case some journeys take a little longer. If you didn't get a rush for my words of wisdom, then I'm afraid there's something wrong with you. Perfect, because mystery thing is rush, and because Neil Peart died, I figured, it said the guys who were there next can wait. That's it.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, sorry.
Our next reader, Derek Galarca.
Galarca. Not reading, a singer.
Okay. All right.
Hello, it's nice to be back here. I've performed here once or twice, and each time I kind of give a little prologue about what I'm singing about. And I'm going to sing a song from my musical. It's a secret song, so to speak. I feel like it would be the most appropriate one of them all right now. This is, well, I'll let you decide what it's called. If ever I had to choose very nature to everywhere else where music you make it out, think you are about the force awakens what dreams may come. What dreams may come. What dreams may come. The singing fool, what I do, the force awakens. Ever I had to choose the very nature to you, everywhere else in music, you figure out which you are about. The force awakens what dreams may come. What dreams may come. What dreams may come. The singing fool, awaken what dreams may come. What dreams may come. What dreams may come. The singing fool, with every note I'd have a tune. I usually have one stowed away just in case there's like an encore.
Encore!
Yeah, come on, man. You haven't been here in a while.
Okay. This one's also from the musical, and I realized I didn't name the musical when I was talking about it. It's still under works, I like sharing this musical with this group because it's a writers group. And this musical is called From Jesus Christ to Jack Sparrow. It's my biography. I'm also writing a book called From Jesus Christ to Jack Sparrow because it's not a fictional tale. It's a non-fictional tale of my life as a theme park actor. How I went from playing Jesus at the Holy Land Experience, which is now currently closing down, and I played Jack Sparrow at Walt Disney World. So I'm writing about how there's a bridge between
It's a hell of a bridge.
theme parks. Yeah, and it's quite a storyline. And
Wonderful.
I come here to kind of like digest my writing with my music. So this song is called The Adventure. I have been too far. What's been going on? Given us time to. Given us time to. The adventure. The adventure. Treasure has a love.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next reader is Marjorie Iyer. I believe you've been here at least once before. Yes. Come right up.
Okay. Last month I didn't tell you that this was part of a book that I'm reading bits and pieces of a novel. Last month we started out on the pot of butter with Marie Giraud de Trouler. I am terrible at pronouncing the French things, but the book is French, so I need to learn to pronounce my French names. Okay, pool of glass. Wading gingerly into the cool spring pond, Anne descended into the glistening waters until the water reached her bosom and submerged momentarily. Rising refreshed, she swam towards the man calling her name. She could not believe her good fortune and followed Mathurin to take her in his arms and slowly caress her neck with his tender lips. The sun pelted down as he continued to whisper her name. Anne, Anne, he called out gently. Anne tingled, and as he turned his chin to face him, as she turned his chin to face him, she radiated warmth and squirmed with delight. But just when she heeded for his tender kiss, his voice reached out and woke her. Mademoiselle, Anne, Mademoiselle Giraud, do wake up. I fret you have gotten too much sun, implored Mathurin Gautier, lifting his hand and gently patting her palm to wake her. Here, allow me to help you to your feet. Do you think you can stand? Awakened, she stared momentarily at the brown deck peppered with green algae. She was still on board the pot of butter in its dead calm, and surprised to find the man in her dreams next to her. He was actually holding her hand, and oh, he was so very close. It took her some time to come to rights. Oh, goodness me, Anne whispered, her throat waterless and her lips cracked. She was shaking and felt weak. What? Oh dear, I must have drifted off. On nerves she blushed and worried her thoughts were visible. Her leather sketch journal lay sprawled on her lap. You were calling out in your sleep, and I couldn't wake you, explained Marie Marchalt to her right, and wringing out a wet cloth, quickly applying it to her forehead. Give her some water, suggested Marie. She is very parched. Mathurin reached for the ladle. Marie Agnes handed it him. Slowly now, he whispered as he put the ladle to her parched lips. That's when their eyes locked, and he caught the obvious concern radiating from his lovely brown eyes. He swallowed slowly, knowing in that instant he truly loved this woman. Smiling, embarrassed, Anne lowered her eyelids, noticing Mathurin's concern. Self-aware, Mathurin hesitated before talking. You were calling out in your sleep, Mademoiselle Giraud, and looking to her friends for support, said, we couldn't wake you. He couldn't take his eyes off her scorched fair skin, stirred by the sweat glistening on her crimson chest. He swallowed noticeably. I'm afraid you are quite sunburned. Anne continued to try and piece together what was about. In her stupor, she had clenched her gray graphite in her other hand. Oh my, not another broken charcoal. At this rate, I'll have only stubbles by the time we reach Quebec. Mathurin smiled, and his worried look eased. You were calling out in your sleep, Mademoiselle Giraud, and we grew concerned, but Marie couldn't wake you. I'm so sorry, Anne. I had to go below and tend to personal matters and got delayed. I didn't realize you had fallen asleep and were out in this hot sun all this time, whispered Marie. You really are quite burnt. Marie Agnes shook her head in agreement, noticing her burnt face and clearly bright red bodice. She handed Anne a wet rag to cool her face and neck. Mathurin smiled warmly as Anne tried to stand but swooned. He grasped her forearm, touching the yellow satin of her sleeve, and offered her another sip of water from the water bucket held by Aunt Marie Agnes. He was moved by her helplessness of the moment. She really was quite delicate. Her fair skin had been burnt considerably, emphasizing her green hazel eyes radiating in the sun. We must help her get below out of the sun. I gather you were sleeping rather soundly, and from the looks of you, for quite some time. He hesitated momentarily, then offered another cup, perhaps a little more water. Oh, yes, thank you. How embarrassing. She must truly look a fright, she thought, shaking. Even her limbs started to quiver. She was truly mortified, realizing her dreams had taken her so far afield. She looked at Marie Agnes, and Mathurin with unquestioning confusion, wondering if they could read her thoughts. Had she talked in her sleep, she wondered? The cool water offered by Mathurin helped quench her thirst and eased her dehydration. How vivid her dream had been. She gulped down the water and could not quench her thirst. Anne's heart surged when she noticed the empathy conveyed by Mathurin's wary eyes. Slowly, mademoiselle, slowly now, encouraged Mathurin, smiling tenderly. A little more, if you please, smiled Anne coyly. Surely her dreams were apparently just that, and no one was privy to them but her. But it had been so surreal. Why did Mathurin look at her so? The looks exchanged between Mathurin and Anne were not lost on Marie and Marie Agnes, and they smiled with delight, knowing full well the two were now connected on the right path. Even if Anne herself did not realize her fate had just changed. She hummed, comforted that her friend would be okay, and more importantly, the affection Mathurin held for her friend was genuine. I see you are in good hands, Anne. I'm sorry, but I must tend to matters below. Will you be all right? A truly silly question, of course, only asked out of common courtesy. Anne smiled, her face still bright pink and hot, nodding. She croaked out, I will be. I thank you. Looking at Mathurin's reassurance, she replied, of course you will. Come along, Marie Agnes. We have to finish that project of ours. Mathurin continued to offer small sips of water to Anne. The two stood together side by side. Then Mathurin asked after a long silence, so, do you swim? Unnerved, Anne was speechless. What? I just asked if you knew how to swim, teased Mathurin. Oh, heavens, he knows. How could he know? No, I mean, why do you ask? Bemused, Mathurin responded, oh, it's just that you were flailing your arms in your sleep, almost as though you were treading water. You looked so mesmerizing and content. He wondered what she had been dreaming. She looked exquisite in her slumber, happy and lovely at the same time. How very odd, replied Anne, beside herself. She had no idea how to continue the conversation, but she didn't want it to end either. Then it dawned on her, perhaps Mathurin felt the same way. He had continued to sit with her in silence, enjoying her company. A cool breeze zapped the moisture on Anne's face. He broke the silence. I shall remember you can't swim, and will need my assistance perhaps one day. If you do not think it too forward of me, you might allow me to teach you. Teach me, gulped Anne. Oui, teach you to swim, laughed Mathurin, mocking her by flailing his arms as if he were treading water. Anne laughed, and Mathurin joined her. She remotely heard the cheers of the crew and Captain Butterpot shouting orders. Oblivious to the sudden activity underway, she was still unaware of the wind until it struck the sails being hoisted, and the ship rocked. Mathurin held fast to Anne. She did not rebuke his embrace, cherishing the security he offered, as the pot of butter groaned and creaked, her sails taking up the elusive wind.
Thank you, ma'am. Our next reader is Avram Friedman, our intrepid camera crew.
Avram, plumber extraordinaire.
You're doomed with that reputation as far as Tom's concerned.
Well, I'm going to do something a little different tonight. Before I do, I didn't mention that I'm recording this, and it will be posted on YouTube. If there's anybody who does not want to be posted on YouTube, let me know, and I will edit you out.
Same here.
Hmm?
Yeah.
No, I want you to, and if you need to do any touch-ups on the books, do that too.
What's that?
I want you to post it, and if you want to
do any touch-ups. I don't know if you can do that kind of thing.
Next time we can do it like the Masked Singer.
What?
Next time we can do it like the Masked
I'm
Singer.
not that sophisticated, really.
You know,
Okay.
writer, who's it here?
Well, so I have just turned 70 years old. And I retired at the end of last year. So I'm looking for something else to do with my time, of course. And so I decided I'd try like stand-up comedy or something.
Finish that book.
Well, yeah, I'm gonna try to finish the book. But what I thought I'd do is I do a combination of. I actually do write some songs in my spare time sometimes, and I have never publicly exposed these songs before, but I'm going to do one today. But first, I'm going to tell you a joke that I found on the internet. It's not an original joke, but it struck me as so funny. It's a goat joke, and I used to own goats, so it struck a chord with me. And it may not make you laugh at all, but I couldn't stop laughing. So I'm going to tell you. So these two stray goats are roaming around together. Now, I posted this on my Facebook page. Anybody here is on my Facebook. They've already seen this. But two stray goats are straying around. And they happen upon a movie studio. And on the grounds of the movie studio, there's a warehouse. And the door is open, and they just walk in. And there on one of the tables, there's an old film, a spool of film, those flat metal canisters. And one of the goats goes over and sniffs the film. And goats will eat anything, So he starts nibbling on it, and he devours the whole thing, canister and all. And the other goat just looks at him. He said, "Did you enjoy that?" And the first goat says, "Not as much as the book."
Oh, that's cute.
Oh, that is cool.
So, now I'm going to sing a rather sad love song that I wrote about 10 years ago, just to balance things out. She worked at the library downtown, quietly helping as people came in to research or read from the books on the shelf, or just to come by to be with himself. Her daughter had just moved away. After 17 years, she had raised her alone. Alone is a feeling you just can't describe. After 17 years of creating a home. So she applied for a job at the Wilkesboro branch. It was time for a move, for a change anyway. Mary needed a new way to follow her heart, reason to feel something by the end of the day. He lived by himself now for nearly 2 years. His heart rested heavy in his chest every night. His wife took their daughter to the city of Asheville, where they hoped it would bring them a happier life. His job took him traveling to capital cities. He was fighting for causes with others like him. His cat needed feeding when he was going away once. Someone mentioned that Mary had done that for him. Well, he'd known Mary for years now, 8, 9, or 10. Her daughter and his had been friends for some time, but they never had spoke much at length to each other. Two ships in the night that were passing in rhyme. Now he paid her to feed her pet while he traveled, and he talked with her more and more in between, then invited her over for dinner one evening. His love started growing, he started to drink. But Wilkesboro called and gave her the job. In a month she would move, she would not be around. She'd made a commitment, no time could be wasted. When no time can be wasted, how can love be found? Well, I don't know exactly the end of the story. I don't know how powerful love it can be. But Wilkesboro may be as close as a heartbeat, or it may be as far as a trip overseas.
You're a multi-talented plumber.
Ridiculous.
Where exactly is Wilkesboro?
East.
The farthest I've ever really been was Charlotte. It was only to go down to do 2 weeks exploring. Which one we use?
Wilkesboro. Land of dreams.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Waldrop, you are next.
Dave. How do I get out of here?
Oh, trapped.
We move a little.
You're alright, I'm just kidding.
It's curveball.
May the darkness of night remind you to use the Schwartz.
Two thoughts come to my mind tonight, and they did when I wrote this piece here. Hoyt Axon said some words don't come easy and some don't come at all. And I'm sure all of you have had that situation sometime or other in your life, maybe writing a song or writing something. And a friend of mine named Malcolm Holcomb says that everything he writes is twisting and turning everything and every word in his mind. And this is one of those pieces that I'm trying to do that to get my thinking kind of straightened out. You ever tried to straighten your thinking out on something? You better. You need to if you haven't already. And this is a very controversial issue. There are a couple of issues in America that really twist us apart. And I wrote this one to try to figure myself out, and it's called, well, I'll just read it. We the people. The First Amendment and Roe versus Wade, women's constitutional rights. This 1973 Supreme Court decision remains a divisive political, religious issue in American life. It's important to note, however, that abortion is not mentioned in the Bible, the Quran, or the Torah. Neither is it referred to in the teachings of any other major world religion. It's also worth pointing out that birth control and abortive processes have been practiced throughout human history. Since there is scant spiritual, religious, historical base to support or reject the Supreme Court decision on Roe versus Wade, I have taken this political and legal stance. Individual liberty, as provided by Roe versus Wade, should be protected by law in deference to all religious teachings, rather than yielding to the tenets of one or more religions that are a part of the entire American mosaic of religious beliefs. This protection of all against the wishes of a single religion is specifically provided for in the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. Roe versus Wade. As currently interpreted by the United States Supreme Court, Roe versus Wade provides permitting those who disagree with abortion at any stage of fetal development to maintain their conscientious objection. No woman is compelled by law to undergo an abortion against her will. Neither is any woman denied her individual choice to proceed with an abortion. Rationale for support of Roe versus Wade. The United States is and must remain a nation governed by laws rather than by religious tenets. Our laws clearly have elements of various world religions intertwined in them. However, our laws do not and should not follow any one religious belief to the exclusion of others. An anonymous writer once remarked, "Tolerance of the intolerable may be wiser than meeting rage with rage." This useful adage may very well guide people who cherish the rule of law that our forefathers established. Few laws have ever been written and enacted that garnered support by every citizen. However, Americans have consistently proven to be a people who choose to follow the law of the land, even when some disagree with all or part of a particular law. I advocate retaining Roe versus Wade in spite of the fact that some disagree with its intent and purpose. The beliefs of the many and varied religions embedded in American culture must be constantly defended against the views of one or more, even majority religions. That concept is clearly written in the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. There it is. That's my thinking right now.
We have another new reader, Henry Wilson.
Oh, that's me.
That's
Oh, that's you.
Henry.
All right, I'll get up and read it for you. Thank you. I drove all the way from Knoxville, so I think I get the door prize for hopefully you'll warm up to my persona here, because I'm not exactly a foreigner. I did teach at Western for a couple years. Okay, so back in the late 80s, between my master's and PhD, I am from Knoxville, more particularly Strawberry Plains. Anyone knows where that is? East of Knoxville. Well, it's important. There was a bridge there. Remember that Civil War? You may know about that. Okay. Well, a couple years ago, I started messing around on Facebook, and I read a lot of poetry. Naturally, I'm going to get a PhD in English. I better. And I taught poetry for like 10, 12, 15 years. It all runs together. But anyway, it's good to get back here to Sylva, and when I was living over here, I learned to enjoy your very hospitable mountain town and City Lights, and I came over here like once a month, Pet Cedric. So now, have I settled in? I'm not completely a foreigner. Am I accepted now? Welcome back. Well, that Civil War unpleasantness, had some fresh heart feelings. We'll move on. So I started writing a poem a day just to see if I could do it a couple months ago, and my ideas come up to like 50, and I'm very near that now. And so I decided it's time to start sharing. I get some feedback from my Facebook friends, but it's good to have flesh and blood friends too. You can. All right. The idea was I'm writing a cycle of what I call weather poems, because as a kid I was very interested in, well, let's just be honest, obsessed with weather. I am currently a weather geek, and I post on Twitter and Facebook my forecast, which is usually wildly off base, but still it's a lot of fun. So the idea is I'm going to have 50 weather poems, and the tentative title is going to be Weather Poems Both Foul and Fair, or something like that, okay? So I'll embed 2 or 3 of those in the middle, see how it goes, and so to sandwich them, the pieces of rye bread between the whatever, is just poems that are not strictly in the weather vein. Ooh, that's a terrible, I'm sorry. I have a PhD. You're not supposed to groan when I do that. Okay. So here's the first one. And some of them have titles and some don't. I'm still working on that. This is called Trotting Fox. This is based on a real incident I had as a child. I've always liked to get out and roam the woods. And, you know, I have to tell you what a pleasure it is to look up and see the plots up here and Double Top. I saw Double Top driving in. So I feel like old friends, you know. Much better than a Facebook friend, to be honest with you. So here's the first one. Trotting Fox. The trotting fox ran through my mind again last night, head down, driven by senses I can't even imagine. The same ragged apparition that's been running through my dreams for 40 years now, sending the same shiver of recognition rippling through me on restless nights, made even more unsettling by the deep knowledge buried in my flickering consciousness that it shouldn't be there. Driven by urgent impulses at the wrong time of day during the wrong season, through the same hilltop forest remnant that escaped the axes and bulldozers tearing down trees for miles around in all directions, year after year. Until this one last remnant of the wilderness that once sprawled 1,000 miles in all directions, it once eternal and ephemeral, remained. Much like my own persistent consciousness knits together generations of ancestors and descendants who would never know me, nor care whether my fleeting awareness ever animated a trotting fox, tracking down its prey or outrunning the memory of a pack of stray dogs, real or imagined, under a rustling green canopy of oak and hickory leaves that had spent 50 million years adapting to the microclimate on this one rocky hilltop, or a handful of nuts and acorns had randomly bounced into wrinkles and declivities in the tenuous, uncertain soil covering the rocks. Yet again the image of the fox unravels, escaping my field of vision, swinging outward like the windover of Hopkins or the falcon of Yeats, or even the swooping eagle from Coleridge's Fragment, and I wake to the same jolting recognition that the fox will always be on the run. So that's poem 1. Now I'm going to read a couple of the ones from the weather cycle, I call it. And this one is based on an old saying. My mom grew up in the country outside Anderson County on a farm just north of Knoxville. And I've tried to record some of her folk wisdom. Anyone ever heard of calling a frost a young snow? No? Okay. Well, maybe. Well, that's just East Tennessee folklore, and I guess it was contained on that side of the Smokies. But anyway, this is the basis of the poem, and I'm still new to this mode. Oh, here it is. Okay. This doesn't have a title yet, but it's based on that just one little stray remark, bit of folk wisdom, my mom said once. Back in the hollers, elderly aunts look out on whitened fields, bathed in wispy, swirling mist on midwinter days, just as a pallid sun slips over skeletal trees up on the ridge, and declare, "Looks like a young snow this morning." But only for the first 30 or 40 frosts. After that, such a proclamation tends toward redundancy, since even the remarkable sight of a field covered in ice crystals stops being remarkable after enough repetition, unworthy of commemorating with a bit of folk wisdom. The ants are probably right. Well, note to self, don't put hard words into your poems. Okay, but a simulacrum of something is rarely as satisfying as the thing itself, even as it glitters along the meandering rill of steaming ice water, declining to freeze under the strengthening sun, leaving unanswered the unspoken question of when the snow that looks like a heavy frost will finally put an end to the endless speculation as to when winter will turn into more than a promise. Okay, that's weather poem number 1. Now, I want to read you this weather poem number 2 about the frogs. Y'all know what well, you know, you hear spring peepers over here, don't you? The early frogs come out and peep. Oh, yeah. That's based on that. That always struck me, and it's the sort of thing I notice, and I say, well, spring is coming. And, of course, look, the local weather these days, the way things have changed, you never know when they'll come out. Have you noticed that they seem to be coming out earlier and earlier? Yeah, well, we've spent them over there. And let's see. It appears I've accidentally erased my frog poem. Well, stuff happens, but I'm still new to this. So I'll just look for the frog poem here later and read, oh dear. This is my worst nightmare when my poems disappear. But how much time do I have left? A couple more poems?
About a minute.
Okay, okay. Well, I'll look up the frog poem later and see what I can come up with. I'll just close. These are all still under development, you know. I'll close with one I wrote this morning. Say I'm trying to write these as rapidly as I can. One thing I was interested in besides meteorology as a kid was astronomy, so I learned a lot of astronomy stuff. And what I'm trying to do with my poetry is kind of combine, you know, literary matters like poetry, you know, with science. And so this is an example of that I'll leave you with tonight. This is called perihelion passage. That is the term for when a comet reaches its closest, makes its closest approach to the sun. Orbiting around small knots of people adhering to each other and their loose associations, clinging together to ward off loneliness, and the awful truth they've been fighting time out of mind is a mere way to circle your way through the day, almost as tenuous as the vast ellipse of a long-period comet, in its far-flung orbit beyond remote Pluto, with its atmosphere frozen into rocks harder than granite, impervious to the feeble warmth of a distant sun that is barely a sun at all, it flickers so faintly. But that's not even the hard part. At the unimaginable distance of the extreme edge of the observable solar system, scarcely feeling the tug of gravity from the pitiful sun, the comet is at least stable, with its water ice so cold that molecules barely move. But as it heedlessly hurtles toward the beckoning sun, in a desperate attempt to gain enough warmth to initiate melting, it will never make it to the flickering star itself. Instead, being whipped around to the same perihelion passage it has traveled thousands of times before. Still millions of miles from its gravitational master, just close enough to feel faint stirrings of warmth, but no closer. Unless, of course, when the angle of approach is too steep, and the comet becomes a sun grazer, drawn into the object of its desire, right through and beyond its customary safe passage. In a final catastrophe that both fulfills it and destroys it, in a paroxysm that might seem tragic to the comet if it had a heart, which it doesn't, but is of no significance at all to the sun if it had a mind, which it couldn't, burning so fiercely while the trillion other comets mill about indifferently, still safely frozen in the absolute zero of comforting cold, paying no more attention to the destruction of the latest misguided comet, making the mistake of heeding the siren song of the promise of warmth that the indifferent peasants in Bruegel's famous painting, who continue their archaic labors, absorbed in who knows what, heedless of the unfolding tragedy of Icarus plunging into the sea, after making the cardinal sin of pursuing too fiercely the fulfillment of his otherwise noble desires. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next reader is Marsha Lee Baker, who was also a professor at Western.
Is this in the right place? Hello, hello. Okay, all right. Well, thanks, thank you. I'm glad to be here tonight with such a fabulous crowd. The writing and reading I've been doing for some time now is turned with an eye or ear or mind and heart toward what might have led me to become a peacemaker, or to think that I have become a peacemaker. So it will maybe evolve into a series of essays. It may evolve into a memoir. It may evolve into dust and glitter. Anyway, all right, I carry on. Okay, but it's kind of topical is how I'm trying to approach things. This one is I pulled together some pieces, and I'm titling this "We Shall Overcome." I do not know whether a white woman giving thanks to a young black man and an older black woman is a way to overcome. I do not know beforehand whether I have unintentionally offended or misspoken. I have heard first and second hand that some black people are tired of educating white people. Likewise, I have heard black persons recommend the first way to learn is to ask them. I just do not know whether or how woke I am. However, I do know enough to know just now that I should look up woke in Urban Dictionary. Reading its several definitions, I have decided I would do better to delete my questionable references to self-wokeness in the next revision. Nevertheless, I put my words together in the most loving way I can and send them on their way. Headed out the door from home to the February 2020 monthly meeting and program of the local branch of the North Carolina NAACP, I glanced over at the hat I had worn in January's annual march celebrating the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It still had the gimme pen on it that I put there from the march. We shall overcome. I impulsively grabbed my hat to take with me. It had launched a stream of questions, the most gripping of which was this: if we shall overcome, then what do I need to overcome? What do white people need to overcome if we, all people of all colors, are to live without racism? The program was planned to be a follow-up to our December 2019 workshop entitled Confronting White Nationalism / Advancing All People. We had actions to review and priorities to set. I was geared up. Another fresh memory has been roaming through me since the 2020 MLK Jr. Unity March, organized and led by members of the fraternity Alpha Phi Alpha and the International Intercultural Affairs Office on the campus of Western Carolina University. After the march, I went inside to warm up and return the name tag I had worn in memory of a black male killed by law enforcement. As I handed it to one of the fraternity brothers, I wanted to say something to him, something in particular. The area where we stood was crowded and he had a job to do, and I'm likely excusing myself for not being able to find the words and speak the thoughts I was having. All I could say was, thank you. Thank you for not giving up. Oh, not an option, he replied with a smile, which I returned and walked away. He assumed, I believe, that I was thanking him for not giving up on him, on not giving up on blacks in America, overcoming our country's racism. He knew that he would overcome, his brothers would overcome. Yes, they will. What I thanked him for, though, was for not giving up on white people, on us, on me. I need to practice how to say what I mean if I am to overcome. Within a few days, I was giving thanks again. Dr. Orlean Anderson Graves Simmons was the keynote speaker for Western Carolina University's recent celebration of the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Afterward, I joined a crowd to shake her hand with gratitude. Then I wrote her a letter because I continued to overflow with her story and what it told me about mine. Now, I'll share some excerpts from my letter to her as a way to pass our stories on. And this is where I write to Dr. Simmons. As a student at Mars Hill College, class of 1977, and later as its director of alumni activities, no, we called them affairs back then, alumni affairs, in the 1980s, I learned of the college's history and heard it recounted at many a Founders Day. Here is what struck me. A founding father put up for auction his slave, Joe Anderson, to secure completion of the college's funding. When funding was completed in time through other means, Joe was not auctioned and instead returned to his owner. every time I heard this story. Questions filled my mind and heart. The founders of this school had slaves. The founders could arrive at no other way to finalize its funding than to sell a person. Auctioning one's slave demonstrated this founder's exceptional generosity and respect for education and the people of these rural mountains. What about Joe? What about acknowledging what Joe would have given if he had been auctioned? What about recognizing all that Joe was not allowed in this negotiation? What about remembering this land's violent history? And what about rededicating this college's future to education, peace, and freedom for all, each and every time this history is told? All of this rose up in me again as I listened to you, Dr. Simmons, and I began to connect my story with yours. Your story told me what I did not hear during my years at Orangeville College. Your story also pointed out my debt to you as a college student. Growing up from South Carolina roots exposed me to white prejudice and racism aplenty. Yet I quietly developed peaceable convictions about unity and humanity. Nevertheless, I was too naive to make sure that I was choosing an integrated college. But I did, because of you. As Director of Alumni Affairs, I became more familiar with your name and legacy as the first Black student to enroll at MHC. I also read about you in regional news venues. During these years, as Alumni Director, I was deeply moved by a Black woman who delivered a powerful talk at MHC for a major college-wide assembly. I wrote a note and slipped it to her. I thanked her for the talk and for the opportunity to look up and listen to a woman speak to us, and, moreover, to a woman of color on that podium. I shared my hope for the day when it would be a common rather than rare experience. I don't recall if that woman was you, Dr. Simmons, though that would be wonderful serendipity between our stories. I admire and envy your clear, strong determination, and I'm grateful for the known and unknown ways it has and continues to matter in so many lives. Listening to you reminds me that all history, including our alma maters, requires revision.
Thank you, Marsha Lee.
Thank you.
Our final reader is Tom Baker.
All right. Now let me say I'm extremely proud to be here amongst all you singers and writers. I mean, we've been doing this for several years now, and it's, excuse my French, it's pretty damn awesome. So thank you very much. I've been reading from my memoir, and I've got a couple of young folks here that have raced with me and trained with me. And how many have ever rappelled off of a cliff? All right, good. Then you'll understand this. I want to tell you about the first adventure race I ever did solo. But first I'll tell you a little bit about my training for it. I had a good friend who was a former Army Ranger. Brian Ellis was his name, and he had served with the 2nd Battalion, 75th Rangers during the 80s. He served in Africa and Latin America. He didn't talk much about it, but he had been in Honduras when we weren't supposed to be in Honduras. Remember Reagan and the Iran-Contra deal? This guy was the real McCoy. He was also a great mountain climber, having climbed El Capitan several times, sleeping in hammocks tacked into the side of a cliff several hundred feet in the air. He was also an emergency room nurse, trained paramedic. Anyway, he had done several adventure races on different teams and a couple by himself, or solo as we called it. He had often told me, Baker, one of the best ways to put a notch in your 6-gun is to do a solo adventure race. Does that sound like a challenge to you? Well, it did to me. Brian had done a race up in Virginia on the head of the new river called the Odyssey Extreme. It was a 30-hour race reputed to be very difficult, to have a very difficult rope course. Brian was also doing it solo at the ripe age of 29. I was doing it at the age of 57. Oh, by the way, the race was put on by a director, and the old boy's name was Jeff Manning. He was a former Navy SEAL. That should tell you something about the race layout. Brian and I ran and biked on tons of old logging roads, rappelled on almost every rock cliff in Jackson County. We also trained on a hell of a cliff in Transylvania County called Looking Glass Rock. It was a 400-foot rappel. If you are ready, I'll tell you about it. We drove over to Haywood County and hit Highway 76, turned up through Caruso, climbed up in the Wagon Wheel Gap under the parkway, turned right on the Fish Hatchery Road and parked looking at the north face of that huge dome of rock. No sweat, GI. We rode our mountain bikes over towards the base of the cliff on an old road, hid them in the bush. I have to make this one point. Everybody calls these roads bike trails and hiking trails, which they are, but at one time, years ago, most of them were logging roads, either truck roads or skid trails, but few people want to give the logger credit for anything. Just saying. Back to the training. We ran back to the truck, which was only about a mile, and drove around to the main parking lot for the big rock. We grabbed our packs, threw in 250-foot ropes or rappel gear and a little water. It is about a mile and a half from the parking lot to the top of the dome, and we jogged it. Brian had done this rappel several times before, so I simply followed his lead. We walked off the back side of the cliff, past the warning signs, don't do this, for 100 feet before we tied the ropes together and grabbed the connected rope, or wrapped the connected ropes around a large pine tree we were going to use as an anchor. Remember, the rappel was 400 feet. I asked him how this was going to work. Baker, just follow me. I will rappel down first at about 200 feet. There is a small ledge with several anchors driven into the cliff. I will stop there and unhook from the rope. Then I will hook the extra carabiner that is attached to our harness, he tapped the carabiner, to the anchor and holler for you to rappel on down. If everything goes well and you are on the ledge with me, I will pull the rope around that pine tree and catch it as it slides down. What if you don't catch it, dude? Baker, are you nervous? Kiss my ass and tell me your plan. He laughed. I simply tie one end of the rope to my carabiner. You want to be an airborne ranger, don't you? He was laughing as he began his rappel down the cliff. But he was gone. A few seconds later, I heard him sing or shout, "Your turn, Ranger Baker." I wrapped the double rappel line around my figure 8 and leaned back to test it. Started down the face of the cliff in short 2-foot leaps. It is often said that there is a fine line between bravery and stupidity. And there is also a fine line between rappelling to standing up straight when your feet will slip and leaning back too far when you will go over backward. Practice, practice, practice. About 30 seconds later, I was standing on that ledge near Brian. Very carefully, I leaned forward, hooked my carabiner to the anchor. Only then did I unhook the rappel rope from my figure 8 and hand it to Brian. Talk about a pucker factor. Brian tied one end of the rope to his extra carabiner and began pulling the other end of the rope down from around the pine tree. That end of the rope disappeared, and a few seconds later there came the entire 300 foot of rope tumbling down the cliff. It's not that heavy, but when you're standing on a ledge attached to an anchor 200 feet in the air, well, anyway. Brian caught the rope and soon had it slid through another anchor. He then attached the rope to his figure 8 again, unhooked himself from the anchor and smiled at me. Ranger was all he was all I heard as it began his rappel with a 10-foot leap. It was a cold day, maybe just above freezing, with the wind blowing around 10 to 20 miles an hour, and old memories suddenly came flashing back. I looked around at the huge dome of a rock I was attached to, like I did the first time I ever walked out the tailgate of a C-130. Wind screaming in your ears, you're flying 1,200 feet above the drop zone, and the jump master is saying, "Just jump, soldier, just jump." I finally jumped. Oh, a quick note here. When I jumped from the tailgate, I tucked so hard that my helmet came off. It floated in front of me for a second, and I fought the urge to reach out and grab it. Then my chute dragged me back into the world. Luckily, my helmet didn't hit anybody on the way down. I found that helmet after I hit the ground. It had a big dent in it. Wished I could have kept it for a souvenir. Back to my story. I was a little awestruck on that cliff, just like back at Fort Lee in rigger school. I was standing on that small ledge about 6 inches wide, 200 feet in the air above the valley floor. My carabiner was attached to an anchor that God only knows who had pounded into a crevice in the rock, and I was hooked to it with my harness. That thin piece of metal was all that kept me from about 5 seconds of terrifying flight and an ugly landing. They told us many times in jump school at Benning that it was not the fall that would kill you, it was that sudden stop at the bottom. I'm sure they were right. Airborne. With my head full of memories, I didn't hear Brian's voice at first. I figured he would shout when he reached the bottom, but no sound had come. Finally, I heard my voice, my name floating on the wind. "Baker, Baker, come on down." It was my turn. "Just jump, soldier." I will tell you that as easy it may sound, unhooking yourself from a secure anchor while your feet are on a 6-inch ledge and you are 200 feet in the air is not easy. Carefully, I followed his lead and placed the rappel rope around my figure 8, grabbed the rope above the anchor with my left hand, with my right hand, which is your brake on the descent, as you guys know, unhooked myself from the anchor. Okay, you're 200 feet in the air. Did I say that before? You're balancing on a narrow ledge, and you start remembering your first parachute jump. I want to be an airborne ranger. I took a deep breath, slid my right hand down the rappel rope as far as I could reach, and wrapped it around my right hip. It became my brake, and now I was ready. I remember looking around for a second, taking a deep breath, leaning back, and beginning my first of many short hops down the face of that cliff. Brian patted me on the back as I unhooked from the rope, and we drank a beer and then jumped on our bicycles.